Okay, let's begin. After the break, we shall now take up the topic, Law of the Sea for deliberations. The discussion on this topic are divided into three parts. The first one is BB&J, and the second part is freedom of navigation. The third part is illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. Before opening the discussion, may I invite the Secretary General to make the introductory remarks. Secretary General, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the agenda item, the Law of the Sea, was taken up for consideration by ALCO at the initiative of the government of Indonesia in the year 1970. Since then, it has been considered as one of the priority items at the annual sessions of the organizations for many years. As of the 3rd April 2018, 42 ALCO member states /S2A furnish a backdrop on the two items proposed for deliberation, namely marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, BB&J, and issues related to the freedom of navigation or sail in international waters and straits. The third point, Mr. Chair, is the issue relating to illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, IUU. Mr. Chairman, regarding the BB&J, the quest of the international community to negotiate and draft an international legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of BB&J has been introduced in the said report. I urge the delegates from ALCO member states to discuss these issues relating to BB&J, taking into account the pending constitution of the working group. As of now, ALCO Secretariat has finalized the terms of reference for the establishment of ALCO open-ended working group on BB&J, pursuant to the decision on the same during the 57th annual session, as contained in the Secretary General's report, and views from the member states and liaison officers have been taken on board. On the second item for consideration, namely issues related to the freedom of navigation, sail in the international waters and straits, has also been taken up pursuant to the proposal by the government of the United Arab Emirates in terms of statutory rules of ALCO. The third item, issue of preventing and combating illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, was proposed by the government of Indonesia and was endorsed by the heads of delegation. Mr. President, we have invited one expert who will speak in his personal capacity in order to assist deliberation on these matters. And all three elements will be discussed together in this session. That means member states wishing to make any intervention on any aspect or all aspects should do so when given the opportunity to make their intervention. Allow me, Mr. President, to invite our expert to deliver his presentation. And before that, I wish to introduce our expert, Captain Ibrahim Mbiu Bendera. He is a ship captain holding a Master Mariner license. He has sailed as a captain for more than 23 years. He also holds a Bachelor of Laws and a master's degree in maritime law. He is currently the advocate and a part-time lecturer at Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute. On top of that, he has written several books, including a book on merit and maritime law in Tanzania. It's a huge book, about 700 pages. He also writes in Kiswahili, and one of his poet book is known as Utenzi wa Nelson Mandela. I wish I could translate it in English. Now I invite Captain Bendera to present not the 700 pages of his book, but within 10 minutes. Captain Bendera.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, all delegates. My paper is a combination, as the Secretary has said, of all the three items together. So we start with what is the background, what is the present, and let us look at what we can suggest for the future. First, the legal issue related to freedom of navigation captures all three aspects, because behind the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention lies a control called flag state control. All ships are controlled by the flag they are flying. And therefore, the concept of freedom of navigation is the primary concept of all activities, transportation activities, and all fishing and all matters relating to the sea. So, when you talk about freedom of navigation, it comes from customary international law that ships flying the flag of any sovereign state shall not suffer interference from other states, apart from the exceptions provided in international law. Freedom of navigation is a maritime concept covered under maritime law, the law governing ships, shipping, and fishing. Second, the regulation on marine biodiversity areas beyond national jurisdiction. The term biodiversity denotes the diverse nature of living organisms in various areas of the sea. We understand that powers that each coastal state has in regulating the waters within its own jurisdiction. But these waters are connected with the high seas in oceans, which cover 71% of the surface of the globe. Now, hence, legal issues facing marine biodiversity of the areas beyond national jurisdiction are connected, and if not controlled, do or are affected by what is happening in sea areas within and beyond the territorial waters. The history of ancient world, as the history of great empires, people of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds which were held together by coercion and or threat of forcible reconquest, empires were many. For example, some of them are coming from the nations which are members of ALCO, including Egypt, China, Persia, Rome, and Byzantine, are examples of the empires before the creation of sovereign states under international law was done in the 14th and 15th century BCE. Freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle that mainly emanated from Mediterranean and Asiatic seafaring activities adopted into European customary maritime law in early jurisdictions. We are informed, in fact, this is a quotation from the Encyclopedia Britannica, that admiralty courts in England commenced in the year 1360. That is the 14th century. So maritime law was codified in the civil law from oral traditions, lex maritima. As consolidated in the rolls of Oleron, later on maritime law appeared in various written codes like Rhodian law and was referred in the Justinian Digest, Consolato del Mare, the laws of Wisby, etc., etc. Under Consolato del Mare, a rule was established which was used by the major naval powers, commonly known as the Consolato rule, which allowed military navies to freely attack enemy ships of any nation on the open seas, but not taking the goods belonging to neutral countries carried on board. However, as time passed on, maritime trade, travel, and conquest by the major European naval powers extended beyond European waters. New ideas regarding how to govern the maritime realm began to emerge. Two main divergent concepts on freedom of navigation appeared. The first one was the concept of mea clausum. This was a concept which emanated from Spain, Portugal, and other great powers at that time, who said that they closed all access to the seas using their naval muscle. These states profited tremendously on maritime trade routes and foreign colonies. The second rule was mea liberum, free seas. These two rules conflicted with each other. One is closed, the clausum. The second one is the free seas. It was propounded by the Dutch under Hugo Grotius, who proposed the mea liberum basics in Dutch. Well, the mea liberum concept is based on three main principles: res communis, res nullius in bonis, and res publica, meaning it is a thing common to all, it is a thing among the property of no single person, and it is a thing of the public. So, customary law changed according to the period of time. As Spain and Portugal weakened in their naval powers, mea liberum took over from mea clausum. In fact, the principles of international law, apart from treaty law, free ship, free goods, was soon overturned again by the practice by both sides in the French Revolution wars in the turn of the 19th century. On the other hand, the US government made it a steadfast practice to enshrine free ship, free goods principle in the treaties amity and commerce it conducted with other countries. The state of affairs came about when Britain finally gave up its resistance to the principle, first formulated by Empress Catherine in 1780 and acquiescent in 1856 Paris Declaration respecting maritime law. The rule became a natural flag covers enemy goods except contraband. So, while the concept mea liberum as a whole became an accepted international custom and law, the practice and implementation of freedom of navigation will during these years be developed through local jurisprudence and political decision-making, especially in the issue of territorial waters. Coastal states' jurisdiction over sea waters was a prime concern of many states. The British, under the Customs Consolidated Act of 1876, propounded what they call the three leagues concept. That is what they used to call it as a canon law procedure. A cannon, that is the big gun on a naval ship, had a range of up to 3 nautical miles. So the British said their territorial waters is 3 nautical miles, and they wanted the rest of the world to follow that one. However, other states, like the Scandinavian countries, wanted 4 nautical miles. Portugal and Spain, Uruguay, Italy, and Russia claimed from 6 to 12 nautical miles. This brought disagreements on the distances of territorial sea and therefore jurisdiction of the coastal states. The disagreements were more eminent at the Law of the Sea Conference in 1958, which was held on the 29th April 1958 in Geneva, Switzerland, in which Chile, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Peru wanted 200 nautical miles of territorial waters. The United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea of 1958 opened for signature 5 conventions, including an optional protocol, compulsory settlement of disputes, as follows. 1, the Convention on Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone, in bracket CTS. 2, the Convention on the High Seas. 3, the Convention on Fishing and Conservation of the Living Resources of the High Seas. 4, the Convention on Continental Shelf. And 5, the optional protocol of signature concerning compulsory settlement of disputes. Under CTS, the exact distance of territorial sea was not determined. Article 1.1 only stated that sovereignty of a state extends beyond its land territory into territorial sea. Article 24 established a contiguous zone of not more than 12 nautical miles. This is a zone established to control certain matters, including prevention of infringement of customs, fiscal, immigration, and sanitary regulations. Freedom of navigation became more prominent part of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in 1982. Article 87, Subarticle 1 of this convention explicitly codifies this concept, stating that the high seas are open to all states. The convention established 3 maritime zones for coastal states, measured from the baseline, namely internal waters on the landward side of the baseline, territorial waters up to 12 nautical miles seaward, and the exclusive economic zone. But however, when it comes to freedom of navigation, the EEZ has freedom of navigation, while territorial waters has innocent passage kind of navigation. Under the UNCLOS, vessels passages are under the following criteria. The internal waters, no foreign vessel passage is allowed without permission. Innocent passage is not allowed in the internal waters. As you heard in the paper, which was previously denoted that the sea level is rising, and therefore the question of internal water, where does it begin, where does it end, also will change, because the baseline is measured from the low water level mark, or a baseline between islands. Number 2, innocent passage in the territorial waters where ships of all nations may pass under it, including military naval ships on innocent passage. Then there is transit passage on international straits. And number 4, freedom of navigation in the high seas. The jurisdiction of coastal states over ships plying in the internal waters is paramount as if they are part of the land territory, meaning that with the exception of internal waters forming by institution of a baseline, the area which was previously not internal waters in which innocent passage is allowed, otherwise no ship can enter into internal waters without permission of the coastal state. Hence, no ship should be in internal waters if not allowed to be there by the coastal state. In the Nicaragua versus United States case, the court stated, I quote, "The basic legal concept of state sovereignty in customary international law, expressed in inter alia Article 2, Paragraph 1 of the UN Charter, extends to the internal waters and territorial sea of every state and to the airspace above its territory. In territorial waters, the passage of ships from other nations is allowed, but it must be innocent as long as it is not prejudicial to the peace, good order, or security of the coastal states." Prejudicial to peace and good order includes the following activities. A, any threat to use of force against the sovereignty of the territorial integrity or political independence of the coastal state. B, any exercise or practice with weapon of any kind. C, any act aiming at collecting information. It goes on up to L. The main problem of freedom of navigation is when it is used in the EEZ and straits of international navigation brings about the question on the maritime security of coastal states. Although UNCLOS has clearly mandated that the reservation of the high seas is for peaceful purposes, maritime security issues become apparent when one state is at the stage of military confrontation with another state. Hence, a coastal state may have the following questions. Question number 1. How do we allow a naval vessel from our enemy to use freedom of navigation to transit passage in our EEZ? 2. How do we allow a naval vessel from state A, which is in a military confrontation with our neighboring state B, to pass through our waters to attack our neighbors? 3. Why is freedom of navigation and transit passage of military vessels carrying nuclear arms allowed in coastal states which have ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? By the way, Tanzania, we signed this treaty on the 26th of September this year. So how can a country ratify a treaty that is not using nuclear weapons, yet through freedom of navigation, another country using nuclear warheads can pass through without permission? Those are the questions, the challenges which we are facing. Freedom of navigation brings to the control of trade on maritime transportation in the high seas. I quote USA President Kennedy, J.F. Kennedy. He's quoted to have said the following, I quote, "Control of the seas means security. Control of the seas means peace. control of the sea can mean victory. The United States must control the sea if it is to protect our security. How is USA protecting its security by allowing USA naval weapons pass through the EEZ of Tanzania? Those are the questions which we have to raise and maintain the status of the EEZ, not to allow freedom of navigation on military vessels. Currently, the main difference between the needs of freedom of navigation between states lies in their economic and military powers, making major powers to need freedom for their military vessels to enter and pass through coastal states without being questioned, purporting to be guarding commercial vessels, while many coastal states need, for security reasons, to control the passage of foreign military vessels in their waters. Hence, the law of the sea being so important, the differences in perspectives make it difficult to establish a stable maritime security regime in the region of alcohol. It therefore follows that innocent passage used in territorial waters should replace freedom of navigation in the EEZ, in which all foreign military ships should obtain permission before entering EEZ, or should be seen. If it is a submarine, it has to be seen. Otherwise, the way how coastal states protect their economic exercises of the EEZ is hampered by the passing of other vessels of military nature through their EEZ without them knowing. For example, 8 members of ALCO have signed the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. They are Bangladesh, Ghana, Libya, Nigeria, State of Palestine, Tanzania, Thailand, and Vietnam. The irony is, although they have signed the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, freedom of navigation allows other nations to pass through our waters with their nuclear weapons. Now let us go to marine biodiversity. As it was earlier noted, the term biodiversity denotes the diverse nature of living organisms in various areas of the ocean, which cover 71% of the surface of the Earth. It is said that life began in the ocean. The biosphere is a system characterized by the continuous cycle of matter. Some abiotic, that is non-living, while others are biotic, living. Of course, accompanying with the solar and an accompanying flow of solar energy in which certain biotic large molecules and cells are self-reproducing. It has been scientifically noted that ocean nourishes life in the sea and on land. Yet, as with waters closer to shore, the health, productivity, and resilience of the marine environment beyond national boundaries is under mounting pressure from human development and global environmental change. Member states of the United Nations have been in the forefront to address the challenges. It is recorded that on 13th February, the United Nations formed an ad hoc and ended informal working group to study issues relating to the conservation, sustainability of use of marine biology diversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction. Nearly 2/3 of biological diversity is beyond areas of national jurisdiction or their control. The ad hoc, open-ended informal working group wrote a letter to the President of the General Assembly of the UN titled Outcome of and Co-Chairs Summary of Discussions, informing the UN that several delegations highlighted the need to complement, respect, and avoid duplication with existing instruments, in particular UNCLOS. The UN Division for Ocean Affairs, the Law of the Sea, has listed down 32 indicative global treaties and 37 indicative regional treaties, which all combine cover ships and shipping and environment protection and fishing of the oceans. So, the preparatory committee recommended the General Assembly the development of a draft text of an international legally binding instrument under UNCLOS. Now, this means, from experience, ILO combined 37 international treaties on labor for the seafarers into one international treaty called Maritime Labor Convention of 2006. So the principles which were used of combining 37 treaties under ILO into one treaty should be now used to combine all these 37 indicative regional treaties and 32 global treaties to make an illustrative and a treaty which can be implemented for saving the biodiversity with the pressures which we are facing. So the recommendation of the General Assembly decided to develop an international legally binding instrument under UNCLOS under the following issues. First is biodiversity sustenance. Second is governance. Third is conservation. Fourth is access to genetic resources and benefit sharing. Fifth is the protected areas. Sixth is the sustainable use. Seventh, oceans and coast preservation and international negotiations. In conclusion, freedom of navigation provides an avenue where the powerful states of the world can have their military marine vessels pass through the EEZ of coastal states or the international maritime passable straits in pursuance of fighting or aiding destabilization of other nations. The ability of coastal states to economically utilize resources in the EEZ, yet they cannot interfere with military vessels from other nations passing through under the freedom of navigation, is an improbable situation where the security of coastal states may be put in jeopardy. The regional maritime security patrols national navies of coastal states, for example, in Tanzania we have East African Community and the SADC, can best be achieved if innocent passage concept is used in the EEZ. It is a humble submission that the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization, being an intergovernmental organization formed since 1956, the Bandung Conference, can advise member states that for maintaining peace in the ocean, it is much better if the doctrine of innocent passage be adopted in the EEZ of coastal states, leaving freedom of navigation in the high seas beyond the EEZ. The Intergovernmental Conference on an International Legally Binding Marine Instrument under the UNCLOS on the conservation and sustainability use of the marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction was scheduled to meet from the 19th to 30th August 2019. It is our recommendation that members of ALCO should use this meeting to discuss various matters in the draft of the international treaty which will be drafted. Thank you very much.
Captain Bendera, thank you very much indeed for this very deeply researched, informative, analytical, and forward-looking presentation. And it is really going to guide us in our discussions. Unfortunately, we may not have much time. There is a very impressive list of speakers which shows the interest and the importance of this topic. But in view of the limited time, I will allow few speakers. How many? Maybe.
Time.
Yeah?
We shall stop at 6:15
Yeah.
sharp.
We have to stop at 6:15 sharp. Now, can I invite the distinguished delegate from the United Arab Emirates, please?
شكرا سيد الرئيس. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. طلبت دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة إدراج موضوع حرية الملاحة في المياه الدولية والمضائق الدولية تحت بند قانون البحار لتسليط الضوء على الانتهاكات الخطيرة لهذه الحرية، حيث شهدت دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة ومنطقة الخليج وبحر عمان في الآونة الأخيرة تجاوزات خطيرة تهدد الأمن والسلم الدوليين، وكذلك القواعد تهدد القواعد القانونية المستقرة في القانون الدولي تمثلت في الهجوم الأخير وما تعرضت له السفن التجارية من عمليات تخريبية طوال سواحل الفجيرة بدولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة بتاريخ 12 مايو 2019. وما تعرضت له
Similarly,
ناقلات
oil
النفط في
carriers
خليج
have been
عمان
attacked in the Gulf of
بتاريخ
Oman on
13
30th
يونيو
of June
2019
2019.
بالإضافة
In addition
للهجمات
to the attacks
التي
suffered
تعرضت لها
faced by
ناقلات نفطية
Saudi oil
تابعة للمملكة العربية
carriers
السعودية
in
في البحر الأحمر
the Red Sea
بتاريخ 3
on 3rd
أبريل
of April 2018
2018
and
و25
25th
يوليو
of July
أيضا
2018
في 2018
west of
غربي ميناء الحديد.
Al-Hudayd port.
إن التهديد الخطير لحرية
The serious
الملاحة
threat to the freedom of
يشهد مزيدا
navigation
من
has
التدهور في
increased
الآونة الأخيرة،
exponentially in the recent
وأن
times.
حرية
The
الملاحة
freedom of
تتطلب
navigation
الاحترام الكامل
demands
لمبادئ
full
القانون
respect to the
الدولي
principle of international law
والاتفاقيات ذات
and
الصلة،
relevant conventions,
وكذلك الاحترام
and also
الكامل
complete
للمبادئ
respect of
الراسخة
the
في القانون
established
الدولي
rules of international law
المتعلقة بالإبحار العابر
relating to the navigation
البحار
in high
العالية
seas, in high waters,
والمرور البريء في المضائق الدولية،
and international straits,
وكذلك
and
احترام
respect
حقوق
of
الدول
the
الساحلية.
rights of the coastal states.
إننا نرى ضرورة
We
إرسال رسالة واضحة
reiterate the
من
need
هذا
to send
المؤتمر
a strong message
إلى
from this
ضرورة
platform
كفالة حرية
to
الملاحة في
ensure
عالم
freedom
البحار،
of navigation in high seas
وكذلك
and
الاحترام
ensure full
الكامل
respect
لحرية الملاحة في
to the
المضائق
freedom in
الدولية،
international straits,
وضرورة
and also
التوصل
reiterate the need
لمواقف
to
دولية واضحة
evolve a clear international position
لكفالة حرية
to safeguard the
الملاحة
freedom of navigation
وفق أحكام
under
القانون
the
الدولي،
provisions of international law,
حفاظا
to preserve international peace and security,
واحتراما
and also
للقواعد
to
الراسخة
ensure
في
respect
القانون
for
الدولي
established norms of international law
بشكل عام
in general
وقانون البحار
and law of the
بشكل
seas
خاص.
in particular.
ونكرر إلى أهمية بذل جهد
And I
دولي
want to emphasize once again the importance of making international efforts and taking a firm position and a strong measures to check the threats of international peace and security, and also freedom of navigation and trade, international trades and waterways, which may have serious implications for the supplies of oil and energy and stability of the global oil markets. We hope, Mr. President, that the House will adopt the para which has been proposed by our country, and we are open for any comments from respected member states. We want that this should be slated as a final paragraph so that we are able to have a clear concept and also a balanced concept of what is happening in order to protect international peace and security. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the United Arab Emirates for your presentation. The next one is Indonesia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of my delegation, I would like to express my gratitude for the opportunity to comment on these important issues, the law of the sea and IUU fishing. On the issue of law of the sea, as we all witness, our ocean world is continuously facing emerging challenges, such as climate change, IUU fishing, sustainable and responsible marine management and exploitation, along with the progress and sophistication in technology in almost all aspects. We need to assure that marine management, resource exploitation, and exploration be more sustainable and responsible. These challenges may have strong influence in the implementation of UNCLOS. Therefore, Indonesia is of the view that the issue of law of the sea should continue to be a priority discussion in ALCO. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Indonesia welcomes the ongoing process taking place in the third session of Intergovernmental Conference, BBNG, in the UN headquarters on 19 until 30 August 2019. Indonesia appreciates the work that has been done by the IGC Secretariat, among others preparing the Zero Draft. Indonesia looks forward for the fourth IGC in 2020 at the UN headquarters. The Zero Draft has served as positive instrument for negotiation. It is expected that state parties could communicate intensively to find out doable and agreeable solutions in the upcoming negotiation process before the convening of the fourth session of IGC BPNG. In this regard, Indonesia is of the view on the importance of establishment of international norms based on the sui generis principle and responsible use of BPNG and ABNG management. This should cover not only the high seas but also the area. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, another issue we would like to raise relates to the freedom of navigation, sail, in the international waters and straits. As an archipelagic state, Indonesia has provided archipelagic sea lane passages in line with the provisions of UNCLOS 1982. Indonesia's examples of best practices based on provisions under Part 3 of UNCLOS 1982 as of Malacca Strait Patrol (MSP) between Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. Tripartite Technical Expert Group Mechanism, Cooperation Forum, and Project Coordination Committee. Indonesia views on the importance of international cooperation in preventing and combating on-board slavery as well as other crimes. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, on the issue of IUU fishing, Indonesia highlights the importance of international and regional cooperation in preventing and combating illegal, unreported, and undocumented fishing, IUU fishing. IUU fishing threatens the fisheries sector that become the livelihood of millions of people in the world. Every year it is estimated that 26 million metric tons fish worth of $23.5 million are lost due to the IUU fishing. IUU fishing hinders sustainable development. It accelerates the depletion of fish stock, places food security at risk, creates unfairness, injustices, and violations of international law, particularly with regard to national territorial jurisdiction. IUU fishing also degrades marine ecosystem, environment, mangrove, and coral reefs. Therefore, Indonesia calls for strong regional and international collaboration to prevent and combat IUU fishing. This may include collaboration among coastal states, flag states, port states, and market states. Against this backdrop, Mr. President, we underline the importance of setting requirements for vessels to be authorized to fish, together with other measures such as monthly catch reporting systems, vessel registration, licensing, monitoring, control, and surveillance, strict domestic regulations, and effective law enforcement, capacity building, law enforcement cooperation. We know that international communities increasingly pay serious attention on addressing the IUU fishing. The IUU fishing has become an important agenda in ASEAN, East Asia Summit, ASEAN Regional Forum, UN Ocean Conference, Our Ocean Conference, World Ocean Summit, UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, APEC, G20, AU, and etc. The Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice also recognized the importance of addressing fisheries-related crime. Some global networks have been established to support global actions, such as Friends of Ocean Actions, Friends of Fisheries, High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Economy, Fisheries Transparency Initiative. There are a number of important initiatives or instruments that have been taken in various regions and forums, such as ASEAN guidelines for preventing the entry of fish and fishery products from IUU fishing activities into the supply chains. APEC roadmap on combating IUU fishing, the regional plan of action to promote responsible fishing practices, including combating IUU fishing in the region. FAO Port State Measures Agreement. With the above consideration, Mr. President, Indonesia is of the view that ALCO needs to play an important role on the issue of preventing and combating IUU fishing through the international law, rules and regulations setting to assure sustainable and responsible fisheries and sustainable development. Finally, we look forward to a productive and substantive exchange of views among distinguished representatives on this issue. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the presentation by the distinguished delegate from Indonesia, which was thorough, long, useful, informative. Thank you very much indeed. Now I call upon the delegation of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Yes.
شكرا جزيلا سيدي الرئيس أسانتي سانا. السيد الرئيس، حضرات السيدات والسادة الحضور، فيما يتعلق بهذه النقطة الهامة وتحديدا القضايا المتعلقة بحرية الملاحة والإبحار في المياه والمضايق الدولية، فإن مصر تؤكد على أن حرية الملاحة في المضايق هو مبدأ معترف به عالميا وفقا لكافة مبادئ.
It is a principle internationally recognized in accordance with the principle of international law. Therefore, all countries must respect this. In the same vein, it is also very important and necessary to work to preserve the freedom of international navigation and freedom of passage in straits based on international convention and laws. The recent challenges that are obstructing the navigation in straits and waterways requires us all to work together to take on the challenges and their negative impact in implementation of the provisions of international law and achieving the common interests of the international community, which will ensure the safety and security of navigation, international trade and their security. Thank you very much.
I thank Egypt for this intervention. Now I call upon India, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the delegation of India, I thank the Secretary General for the introductory remarks on the topic. We commend the ALCO Secretariat for its very useful brief on law of the sea, with focus on ongoing negotiations on an internationally legally binding instrument under the UNCLOS on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Indian delegation wishes to touch the ongoing BBNJ process. India had participated in the negotiations all through, including in the recently concluded Third Intergovernmental Conference on the instrument. Indian delegation emphasized the necessity of having a legal regime on BBNJ so that there are clarity and clear guidance over the procedures to access the resources of BBNJ. We believe that this will not only help conservation efforts, but also augment scientific investment on the exploration of species from ABNJ region before they become extinct. More importantly, the use of the resources will become transparent and thereby conservation efforts will be feasible. Indian delegation is of the view that while IGC effectively discharges its duty as per the mandate of the UNGA resolution, as envisaged in the resolution, the work and results of IGC should be fully consistent with the provisions of the UNCLOS. It should not undermine existing relevant legal instruments, frameworks, and relevant global, regional, and sectoral bodies. Indian delegation supports meaningful discussions in developing the text of the proposed implementing agreement, taking into consideration the 2011 package, deliberations, and outcome of the earlier processes, including the report of the preparatory committee established by the UNGA. My delegation wishes to briefly deal with each of the topics in the BBNJ process. On the topic marine genetic resources, including sharing of benefits, Indian delegation is of the view that the scope of the instrument must cover every aspect of the marine genetic resources in the area and high seas without prejudice to the relevant provisions of the UNCLOS and other relevant instruments. The proposed regime has to be fully consistent with the provisions of the UNCLOS, which guarantees rights and jurisdictions of coastal states in their maritime zones, including the extended continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles where applicable. Indian delegation is of the view that right to access MGR is crucial to the advancement of science and technology development, leading to its sustainable use. In case of regulating access to MGR, it is pertinent to note that the genetic material required for bioprospecting is very less, and hence it is desirable to regulate access to MGR without prejudice to the regime on marine scientific research provided under UNCLOS. We are also of the view that there should be a monitoring mechanism to establish traceability of marine genetic resources for meaningful sharing of benefits. As regards the objectives of benefit sharing, my delegation supports the application of the principle of common heritage of mankind as the underlying principle of benefit sharing. On the issue of benefit sharing modalities, Indian delegation is of the view that the sharing of benefits shall be done at different stages. At the research level, sharing shall be making the information about the research outcome publicly available, whereas the stage when the research outcome has led to commercial venture, the sharing could be even at monetary level. On the question of what existing instruments and framework will be applicable, Indian delegation is of the view that we can take guidance from the existing instruments. However, keeping in mind the fact that the resources of ABNJ are different from land resources. On the topic environmental impact assessment, the UNCLOS provides guidance in Part 12 of the Convention, particularly under Articles 192, 204, 205, and 206. Considering the delicate nature of marine biodiversity and marine environment in ABNJ, activities in the ABNJ require EAA, provided there is no duplication or it does not undermine the existing framework or regulations provided in the other relevant instruments. The present state of scientific understanding on the possible impacts on marine biological diversity is not adequate, and hence EAA plays a critical role on the protection of marine environment and achieving the objectives of the implementing agreement. From a practical perspective, it may be difficult to set minimum threshold of impact, as it could vary amongst ecosystem, and especially when our scientific knowledge on biodiversity of such ecosystem in ABNJ region are limited. However, it is desirable to have a minimum threshold of impact based on ocean-based sound scientific principles as the basis for the EAA studies. EAA activities carried out by the proponent state and reports submitted by them be reviewed by a competent scientific and technical body, as in the case of the International Seabed Authority. This competent body may update the guidelines on EAA. The EAA regime provided in the Madrid Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty and International Seabed Authority could be explored as models for this implementing agreement. On the topic area-based management tools, including MBAs, Indian delegation is of the view that there is a need for institutional mechanism to coordinate ABMTs on the basis of a sound science-based approach, ecosystem uniqueness, application of precautionary principle, transparency and accountability, and due regard to coastal states involved in the process. At the same time, we should also ensure that position of any existing MBAs under similarly placed instruments is not undermined. Management of MBAs should ensure conservation and sustainability, as this being the main focus of this instrument. While there is an obligation under UNCLOS to protect and preserve marine environment and for states to cooperate with each other in the conservation of living resources in the areas of the high seas, we believe that rights of other states, including freedoms of the high seas, are equally important, and challenge would be to arrive at an effective balance so that these rights are not restricted due to employing ABMTs and declaration of MBAs. Therefore, procedures to establish due diligence in identification of ABMTs and MBAs, consultation process through regional cooperation, and institutional mechanism for final adoption are important components that need to be discussed. Finally, on capacity building and transfer of technology, Indian delegation is of the view that capacity building should be need-based and country-driven. Indian delegation supports the view that enhancing and developing the capacity and ability of developing countries and LDCs is very crucial to create a well-informed and knowledge-based society that would enable to assume its responsibility and obligations under the new instrument, leading to conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity, both within the jurisdiction of coastal state and in ABNJ. Indian delegation emphasized the support for international cooperation, especially through establishment of national and regional marine scientific and technological center, which are important from the perspective of training and education of nationals of developing states and others. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the delegation of India for its very detailed inputs in this debate. Now I call upon the next delegation, distinguished delegate from the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation would like to take this opportunity to briefly comment on BBNJ. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Division of Oceans Affairs and the Law of the Sea of the Office of Legal Affairs of the UN for their hard work and excellent insight in putting together the draft text based on the discussions of the past intergovernmental conferences. Despite the continued efforts of all participating states and other stakeholders, gaps remain wide. If we are to deliver a legally binding instrument that can be widely accepted and contribute substantially to the conservation and sustainable use of BBNJ, we need to work together to come up with an instrument that is feasible and practical while not undermining the existing regime of the Law of the Sea as already agreed upon. The Republic of Korea will actively engage in the current and future intergovernmental conference with other states and stakeholders to build upon the draft text and expand the common ground for discussions on key BBNJ issues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Delegate from the Republic of Korea. Shall we? With this last intervention from the Republic of Korea, we should break and be on time for the dinner invitation from Japan. I think the Secretariat will guide us where the dinner is going to be. It is within the building, is it? Yeah. Yes. Now, tomorrow we'll continue with the interventions on this subject. We still have Tanzania, Kenya, Japan, Iran, Vietnam, and China. We should seek to finish these discussions by midday tomorrow or just before lunch. I'm proposing whether we should start a little bit earlier instead of 9 o'clock, maybe start around 8:30, or if you think that is a little bit too early, let me know. What are your views? Nepal.
Mr. President, we have
Is that Oman?
we have already listed our names, but not included.